You sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I just want to start with the news that we're kind of going through this morning, the fact that we have reporting that response to the U.S. proposal has been conveyed via the Pakistanis to the U.S. Your reaction to that, and what do you need to see in that response to feel better about the prospects of this conflict coming to an end?
Well, some great reporting there. And like everyone else, I'm waiting to see what the details are. But we have to take a step back and remember that we're waiting for agreement on a ceasefire that is only necessary because of a problem that President Trump created in the first place. You know, Iranians would not know that they had this potentially powerful tool in closing the Strait of Hormuz, but for our attack. And so this is, as you were pointing out, just one step in a much larger conversation about the very real concern about having a nuclear-armed Iran. But we're really in a place now where the president, I think, is looking to save face. It's a war that we know now there was not a clear imminent threat, but as has been true throughout this war, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I've gotten zero up-to-date real-time information from this administration. There have been no public hearings, and so it's really a little bit like poking in the dark to try to figure out where we are and where this administration hopes to land ultimately.
Are you concerned about the lack of what you just talked about, a consultation with Congress, as well as something people keep talking about with us is the lack of technical experts going into these negotiations? When they negotiated the original Iran nuclear deal, which the Trump administration pulled out of during the first term, that was months and months of negotiations in Geneva with multilateral partners, with State Department officials, junior officials, people from IAEA. The State Department, as far as we can tell, has been largely cut out of these negotiations. It is really only 3 people and the president, it seems, making these decisions. Are you confident that they have the knowledge they need to go into these rooms and come out with a deal that is advantageous to the United States?
Fortunately, I'm not confident. What I can tell you is what I do know from sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee is that even if the State Department were at the table, that department has been absolutely gutted. So a lot of the support infrastructure that should be in place doesn't exist. And the fact that this president also, on top of that, likes to go it alone so much is really problematic for, I think, finding those kind of sustainable deals. What worries me in all of this is that we're going to end up with a deal that is equal to or maybe even worse than that JCPOA, which was imperfect, by the way. There were opportunities for improvement. But President Trump created this environment in the first place by ripping up that original agreement, allowing Iran to really go at their enrichment program with great vigor following ripping up that deal that, as you mentioned, was very involved and very detailed. And so now we're back at a place where if we can get through a ceasefire agreement and if we can get back to the table, I'm hopeful that we can get back to a place where there's not enrichment happening. But we have a long way to go. And in the meantime, there's been an incredible amount of pain inflicted upon not just Americans in terms of service members' lives lost, hundreds, if not at least tens of billions of dollars spent, pain at the pump for Americans and, frankly, across the globe. And so we're asking here, you know, to what end? And I think at this point, the president can't really answer that question.
Let's talk a bit about what this has to bear on U.S. politics. I'm just going to note here, Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, is on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker on NBC News. He said the U.S. isn't going to take off any options off the table when it comes to Iran. An interim Iran deal has got to be possible, he said. And then he noted gasoline and diesel prices are going to remain up while this war continues. I'm curious how you see that pressure mounting as you talk to constituents and make your way around the district. You mentioned you haven't been briefed formally by this administration on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We did see the Secretary of Defense go up and speak to the Armed Services Committee. There is some speculation that maybe we're reaching a greater appetite for a war powers resolution on Capitol Hill. What's going to change the conversation or the political terrain? Is it going to be gas prices, diesel prices continuing to rise apace? Or is it going to be that? The longer this lasts without any indication of sort of where the direction of this war is headed from the administration is going to finally lead you and your colleagues to do more, try to do more to get administration officials up to Capitol Hill to give you some answers?
Yeah, appreciate those questions. I'll start with the war powers resolution. I mean, this is now beyond the 60 days and the flexibility that my colleagues on the Republican side have said the president deserves. So it's not a suggestion, it's the law. If the president wants to continue military operations, he has to have authorization from Congress at this point. I think the law is clear. And so that's that on that point. I would say,
but Congressman, I want to interrupt you really quickly. Do you think that would concern this particular president? Do you think anything Congress passes, even if it would pass a war powers resolution, do you think that would stop him?
Well, and that's not a reason for Congress not to try to stop him. But if the president blows past war powers restrictions, then I think we have to sort of up our game as members of Congress to hold this president accountable. This is a president who has consistently shown a disdain for any sort of check. And unfortunately, my Republican colleagues have largely deferred to the president on those issues. And I hope that given the consequence and given the impact, to the other point, I think that the costs of at the pump, and it's not just at the pump, we're seeing it on airline tickets, we're seeing it through surcharges at places like Amazon, we're seeing it through what's happening with food prices. This is having impact across the lives of all Americans. And so I think what's happening is, in particular, my Republican colleagues in Congress are seeing that this is going to be a real drag on their election prospects in November. And I think this is really going to fuel a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. I think we're going to see a closing, if not a Democratic takeover of the Senate. So I think these issues are real. People are really hurting as I talk to my constituents. And I think it's really interesting to know that usually when it's whether one of the secretaries or the president himself, these are millionaires and billionaires who are members of this administration telling Americans it's going to be okay, it's only temporary. That's not acceptable to people who are trying to put a roof over their head and food on the table.
Let's move, if we can, to the summit that's going to take place this week in Beijing between the president and President Xi Jinping. And we had your Democratic colleague, Ro Khanna of California, on the show yesterday, and we asked him what he's looking for as an outcome from that meeting between those two world leaders. Let's take a listen to what he had to say in reply.
Maybe.
We may not emphasize it if I can.
He has a lot that he has to reverse. We've had China hold us hostage on rare earths and critical minerals. I want a deal that actually helps American farmers, American shipbuilders, American manufacturers, and I hope he will work to get that. He hasn't so far.
Apologies for that delay. Congressman Khanna, looking for an economic resolution to come out of this meeting in Beijing. Similar goals on your part? What would you like to see these two leaders announce at the end of those meetings?
I think that's part of it. What I can tell you is this is a president who's been very soft on China. The one place where he's been hard is on tariffs, and that has negative impacts for everyone. No one wins in a trade war. But what we do know is that this president's been very soft in terms of advanced chips and the selling of those. And that really is, I think, putting our national security at risk. You see a ton of pieces of legislation around export controls in the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I think it speaks to this concern of the way this administration is acting and in general on the issue. So yes, in addition to what Representative Khanna had said, I actually want to see our president take a harder stand on some of these export control, some of this advanced chips, and looking more in the American interests. I'm also looking to making sure that President Trump takes a much more affirmative stance in support of our friend and partner Taiwan. I know that I just introduced legislation, bipartisan legislation. I'm a co-lead with Representative Kim, that would have the United States do a survey of all the potential responses if there were to ever be an invasion of Taiwan by China. And so I'm hoping that the president not only step up for American farmers and American interests from a national security perspective, but also to be a much more ardent supporter of Taiwan's interest in these meetings.